Hi, everybody, and welcome to Psychology in 10 Minutes. If you're watching me on YouTube, it's good to see you. If not, I invite you to head over to youtube.com/at Psychology in 10 Minutes, where you can not only hear, but also see this episode. And while you're over there, please like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future video content. Are you analyzing me? It's actually a question I get asked a lot, and honestly, I dread it just a little bit. In fact, I was just asked this question the other day when I was at a small gathering. A friend of mine introduced me to one of their friends, and that person politely asked me what I did for a living. And you guessed it, when I responded saying I was a psychologist, they stopped, looked a little scared, took a step back, and said, "Oh, I better be careful what I say in front of you. After all, you could be analyzing me." So that's the question I want to answer today. Am I actually analyzing you? And by extension, if you were to meet a mental health professional, a psychologist, a therapist in a purely social setting like a party, is that person actually analyzing you? Even though it might sound surprising, I think the answer is a little complicated because it's both yes and no. So let's start with the no part of the equation. No, if I were to meet you in a purely social setting, like a party, I would not be analyzing you anything like I would if you were a client coming to me for psychotherapeutic help and support. Doing psychotherapy is actually really hard. In fact, it's exhausting. This is what makes the topic of how to avoid burnout one of the most popular subjects of conversation among my psychotherapy colleagues. And the way I see it, there are two main reasons why psychotherapy, and by extension, analyzing someone in a psychotherapeutic way, is so exhausting and difficult. First and foremost, it requires deep, active listening. I'll be honest with you, as long as you promise not to tell anyone else. If I'm meeting with friends over a beer, I'm usually more concerned with the next thing I'm about to say than what they're telling me. But if I'm talking with a client, that is totally reversed. In order to do good therapy, I absolutely have to listen deeply and openly. I have to focus laser like attention on what that person is telling me because literally what I'm trying to do is to reconstruct their psychological world inside of my own mind. I can't think of any other way to understand them well enough and begin to offer suggestions that could actually help them in their unique lives. This, by the way, is partially at least what is meant by the word empathy. Empathy means more than simply expressing concern or care. Now, don't get me wrong. Expressions of concern and care are super important in therapy. Why would anyone come to me and trust me enough to be vulnerable in front of me unless they truly knew that I cared about them? But expressions of concern and care are only half of what we mean by empathy. The full other half is listening so intently and indeed openly that I can begin to feel a little bit of what my client is feeling. In fact, that's what the word empathy means, in feeling, to be in feeling with someone else. It also means that I'm able to see the world a little bit through their eyes, at least as much as I can. Now, all of this requires me to put my own judgments, if I have any, or my own biases, or even my own personal triggers on hold. If I'm doing therapy with a client who kind of reminds me of an old friend that I had a little bit of a falling out with, it doesn't do me any good, and it certainly doesn't do them any good to have that cloud my ability to truly see them as the unique human beings they are. All of this takes a lot of work, so I don't find myself doing it casually over a beer. The second reason I think it's so hard to analyze people within a psychotherapeutic context is that we therapists aren't just doing this using our gut or our intuition. Instead, we're using deep, complex, research based models of the mind, which are sometimes called therapeutic orientations. My personal therapeutic orientation is cognitive behavioral. So that means that as I'm deeply listening to my clients, I'm trying to discern what are those patterns that they're in their lives that they want to change, that are causing them distress. How is that affecting their emotions deep down? And most importantly, are there automatic thoughts present? Those ways that we criticize ourselves or talk to ourselves that sometimes can sabotage us? And are there so called core beliefs or schemas present, which are often ways we internalized as a little kid for viewing ourselves, the world, and our future? By the way, cognitive behavioral is only one of many theoretical or therapeutic orientations. Other ones include psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, process experiential, emotion focused, existential, person centered, and others. All of the ones I just mentioned are totally legitimate. But regardless of which one a therapist is using, this is detailed work. That's one of the reasons why therapists have to go to school for so long. 2 to 3 years for a master's degree, 4, 5, or more for a doctoral degree. So, no, I don't find myself casually doing these things at a party. I don't even know how I would begin to start. By the way, if you agree or disagree with anything that I'm saying here, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter, because I'm mainly just speaking for myself. So that's the no part of the equation. What about the yes part? Well, last time I checked, a hallmark of human beings, of all of us, is that we're constantly trying to understand the world around us. I'm pretty sure that's one of the characteristics that, evolutionarily speaking, allowed our prehistoric ancestors to survive long enough to pass on their genes to us. And of course, one of the most important aspects of the world around us is other people. So, by extension, we're constantly trying to understand and make sense of other people, their personalities, their behaviors, their intentions, their motives. When we do this with ill intention, we sometimes call it gossiping. When we do it with good intentions, we might call it neighborly concern, or maybe just getting to know you. But regardless of what we call it, we all do it, including me. I'm human. In fact, I was thinking about the last time I was on the dating market years and years and years ago. One of the things I really had to fight in myself was a tendency to jump to conclusions about whoever I was on a first date with. Like I said, we're all human, we all do it to one degree or another in one context or another. So if you're telling yourself that you never analyze or even judge other people, chances are you're lying to yourself. But this, just to be clear, is very different than the kind of formal therapeutic analysis that I was talking about earlier. When I'm at a party and I'm just informally analyzing, or I suppose you could say getting to know someone, I'm not necessarily putting all of my judgments on hold. But when I'm doing therapy, you'd bet I am. When I'm in an informal setting, just trying to get to know someone at a party, I'm not necessarily listening with laser like focus and trying to reconstruct a sense of their psychological world in my own mind. But when I'm doing psychotherapy, I most certainly am. When I'm at a party and I'm just trying to informally get to know someone, I'm definitely not applying a research based complex model of the mind to trying to make sense of what's going on with them and offering care and support. But if I'm seeing someone as a psychotherapy client, I very much am doing just this. In other words, these two ways of getting to know someone, the less formal analysis, if you want to call it that you might do in a social setting, and the more formal psychotherapeutic analysis that I was talking about before, are two very different modes of being. So the next time you run into me at a party and wonder if I am analyzing you, the answer is most certainly yes, and so is everyone else. We're all human and we're all doing it to one extent or another. But just to be clear, no, I'm not analyzing you in anything like the same way that I might if you were a client coming to me for psychotherapeutic help. That's something very different and very special. The truth is, I'm probably just doing the same thing everyone else at the party is doing, just trying to be liked and have a nice time. And speaking of having a nice time, I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. If you would like to find out more about me or my psychotherapy practice, you can visit davidfeldmanphd.com/therapy. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes of the podcast, or you have any questions about psychology that I can try to address, please leave them in the comments box below. Thank you, of course, as always, to my patrons and to those of you who have bought me a virtual coffee. I invite you to join them in keeping this show going. You can find links for how to do that below this video. And of course, as always, thank you for joining me.